A quorum being present, the Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications will come to order. Subcommittee is meeting today to consider a committee print on promoting resilience and efficiency in preparing for attacks and responding to emergencies, or PREPARE Act. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. As we prepare to commemorate the 14th anniversary of September 11th attacks and observe National Preparedness Month, it is fitting that the subcommittee is meeting to consider legislation to enhance our nation's preparedness. The committee print we're considering this morning seeks to enhance accountability at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Office of Emergency Communications, and Office of Health Affairs at Department of Homeland Security. The PREPARE Act builds efficiencies and increases coordination for preparedness improvements while providing greater accountability for taxpayers. The print requires FEMA to leverage experts within DHS in developing policy and guidance for $1.2 billion in annual grants. It requires FEMA to assess how terrorism grants funding has closed identified capability gaps and to provide grant recipients with grant management best practices to ensure optimal and efficient use of taxpayer dollars. It takes into account the feedback from various emergency response provider stakeholder organizations regarding FEMA's administration of preparedness grant programs, including establishing a 3-year period of performance and prohibiting FEMA from implementing its National Preparedness Grant Program proposal. It authorizes Operation Stone Garden, a border security grant program vital to law enforcement agencies and communities along the border, including in my district. In response to recent GAO findings, this ensures federal departments and agencies meet minimum standards to demonstrate readiness to execute responsibilities in response to terrorist attacks, natural disasters, and other man-made disasters. It provides a mechanism for sharing of after-action reports from exercises within state, local, tribal, and private sector officials who can take action to close identified gaps. It establishes a forum for information sharing in the use of social media on the aftermath of terrorist attacks and other emergencies between the Department of Homeland Security and other key stakeholders. It requires applicants for federal preparedness grant funding to certify they are effectively coordinating and planning for statewide interoperability. It protects first responders, avoids millions of dollars of wasted costs, and enhances preparedness against bioterrorism by providing federally stockpiled anthrax vaccine to first responders, resources that would otherwise be thrown in the trash down the line. And it requires department components to implement recommendations set forth in audits completed by the Government Accountability Office and the DHS Inspector General. This text has been informed through subcommittee hearings and meetings, as well as discussions with the minority, various offices within the Department of Homeland Security, the GAO, and DHS Inspector General and relevant stakeholders. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and stakeholders as this bill continues through the legislative process. I urge all members to join me in supporting the committee print, and I yield back the balance of my time. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for his opening statement.
Good morning. I'd first like to thank Chairman McSally for holding today's markup of the PREPARE Act. On the eve of the anniversary of September 11th, the 14th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, I'm pleased that we are taking the opportunity to make improvements to federal law to enhance our ability to support and partner with first responders. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to honor those who we lost September 11th during those attacks and to honor the bravery of the first responders, particularly those of the Jersey City Fire Department who performed their jobs heroically that day and those that followed during the cleanup effort. At the outset, I'd like to thank Chairman McSally for drafting this bill in a bipartisan fashion. Such collaboration yields better, more effective public policy, as anyone who has reviewed the PREPARE Act can plainly see. It has been nearly 10 years since this committee sent comprehensive legislation to the floor to update the federal policies related to disaster preparedness. In the decade that has passed, this subcommittee has done extensive oversight of activities related to first responder grants, emergency communications, and preparedness for a chemical or biological attack. Additionally, intervening events from natural disasters like Hurricane Sandy, which affected my home state of New Jersey, to terrorist attacks like the Boston Marathon bombings, revealed not only the gains in emergency preparedness that have been achieved since 9/11, but also areas where challenges still remain. Today, we are acting to update the federal law to reflect this subcommittee's oversight findings regarding lessons learned through real-life disasters response as well as stakeholder feedback. The bill contains several important provisions, but I'd like to highlight a few of them. Since I joined this committee in the 113th Congress, I have worked to advance federal policies to improve interoperable communications capabilities at the federal, state, and local level. Accordingly, I am pleased that the PREPARE Act will require the Department of Homeland Security to update the National Emergency Communications Plan on a regular basis to ensure that evolving communication technologies are integrated and leveraged effectively at all levels of government. Additionally, this bill includes important provisions related to cybersecurity of the nationwide public safety broadband network to ensure that it is reliable for the first responders in this community. The PREPARE Act also contains language to address challenges related to the effective execution of the emergency support functions under the National Response Framework. This language is an important step in remedying confusion regarding which federal agency is in charge of coordinating federal response to an incident. That kind of confusion hamstrings the federal response to the domestic Ebola cases last year and undermined public confidence in the government's ability to manage the crisis. Finally, I am pleased the bill incorporates the statewide Interoperable Communications Enhancement Act, a measure that I introduced to maintain gains we've made at the state level with respect to interoperability. Again, I want to thank Chairman McSally for holding today's markup, and I urge my colleagues to support the PREPARE Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Payne. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. By agreement between the ranking member and the chair, the subcommittee, by unanimous consent, shall use an amended roster today.
Madam Chair, reserving the right to object, and I will not object, would the chair please explain our agreement regarding the amendment roster? I yield to the chair.
I thank the ranking member and all the members of the subcommittee for agreeing to the use of an amendment roster. We have agreed that the committee print be open to amendment at any point and that we shall take up amendments in the order listed on the roster. The chair will allow members to offer amendments listed on the roster out of order to the extent practicable and in a manner not prohibited by House or committee rules. Amendments not listed on the roster may be considered at the conclusion of consideration of the roster. The chair would also note that there is a bipartisan agreement on these amendments. Members may be permitted to offer their amendments in block.
I thank the chair for this explanation, and I withdraw my reservation.
I thank the ranking member and now call up the Promoting Resilience and Efficiency in Preparing for Attacks and Responding to Emergencies Act. The committee print was circulated in advance and printed copies are available. The clerk will designate the committee print.
Committee print.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. Without objection, the committee print is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Per the roster agreement, listed first on the roster is amendment number 60, offered by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne. Would the gentleman like to offer his amendment?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I have 4 amendments at the desk, and I ask unanimous consent for them to be considered en bloc at this time.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will report the en bloc amendment.
En bloc amendment to the committee print of the PREPARE Act, offered by Mr. Payne.
Without objection, the reading of the en bloc amendment is dispensed with. Mr. Payne is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you. My en bloc amendment is comprised of 4 separate amendments that build upon the provisions contained in the underlying bill. My first amendment would ensure the right people are at the table when discussions are made about how federal grant funds are to be spent at the state and local level. Too often, we think of emergency response too narrowly as simply law enforcement or fire departments. Emergency response needs to be viewed the way that Craig Fugate, the FEMA administrator, does, as a whole community undertaking. Indeed, we heard from Save the Children about the disconnect in some communities between emergency planners and school districts and child care facilities. My First Amendment would facilitate a whole community approach to disaster planning by defining more specifically who should be on the state and urban area planning committees. My Second Amendment would improve Congress's ability to address challenges identified by the DHS Office of the Inspector General related to FEMA's ability to track corrective actions taken by the federal agencies following exercises of real-life events. My last two amendments build upon my ongoing efforts to improve interoperable communications. One amendment directs the Office of Emergency Communications at the Department of Homeland Security to report to Congress annually on its outreach activities with first responders and state and local governments. The other builds upon the DHS Interoperable Communication Act, which became law earlier this year by requiring the Undersecretary for Management to coordinate with appropriate component heads to ensure that all radio users are trained on the use of the DHS radio systems, including interagency protocols. I urge my colleagues to support these amendments, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion of the unblock amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the unblock amendment to the committee print offered by Mr. Payne. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the unblock amendment is agreed to. Per the roster agreement, listed next on the roster is amendment number 004, offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Donovan. Would the gentleman like to offer his amendment?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask for its consideration at this time.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print of Prepare Act, offered by Mr. Donovan.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Mr. Donovan is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Madam Chairwoman, it has been almost 3 years since Superstorm Sandy devastated New York City, killing dozens of people, destroying thousands of homes, and causing billions of dollars in damage. The challenges faced in disaster preparedness and recovery will not be fixed overnight, but piece by piece, we can work together to make life a little easier for those who went through this horrible tragedy and to make sure that the process works better in the future. I offer this amendment as one of those pieces. It will protect flood insurance policy holders' rights to information about their claims. It will protect their right to have their claims fully and properly reviewed, and ensure that they have more options to protect their homes from flood damage and reduce their flood insurance premiums in the process. Specifically, this amendment will make 3 important improvements to the National Flood Insurance Program. First, this amendment addresses engineering reports, which were the focus of post-Sandy investigations after 60 Minutes revealed reports were fraudulently altered to minimize damage claims. It will empower and protect policyholders by requiring that engineers and inspectors employed in access to NFIP claims provide policyholders with copies of the report detailing flood damage to their homes at the time the reports are generated. This will not only protect from fraud, but it will increase efficiency and transparency in the NFIP process claims. Second, it will fix a contradiction in the claims review process that effectively prevents many policyholders from fully utilizing the FEMA appeals process for fear of missing their opportunity to seek relief in federal court. It will do this by delaying the start of the 1-year statute of limitations on claim lawsuits until policy owners have had the opportunity to completely have their FEMA appeal heard. Third, this amendment will require FEMA to complete the long overdue process of developing alternative flood mitigation guidelines for residential structures. Many of our constituents own or live in multifamily homes that simply cannot be elevated. They need alternative mitigation options that could protect their homes and reduce flood insurance premiums. Madam Chairwoman, this amendment is only one step in fixing the flood insurance program, but it is a necessary one. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues in Congress on improving the National Flood Insurance Program, increasing coastal flood resilience, and reducing costly insurance premiums. I would like to thank the National Multifamily Housing Council and the National Apartment Association for their support of my amendment, and would ask for an unanimous consent that their letter of support be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I urge the committee to adopt this amendment, and I yield the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by Mr. Donovan. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Listed next on the roster is amendment number 21, offered by the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman. Would the gentlewoman like to offer her amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair, I would. As a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Oversight...
Wait a minute. Amendment, you have an amendment at the desk.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print of the Prepare Act, offered by Mrs. Watson-Coleman.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Ms. Watson-Coleman is recognized for 5 minutes on her amendment.
Thank you again, Madam Chairman. As a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency, I have devoted a significant amount of time to reviewing the department's various systems modernization efforts. So I have particular interest in the Federal Emergency Management Agency's modernization efforts. I understand that FEMA grant programs have seen several iterations of systems modernization in recent years. Each successive effort offered the promise of solving challenges that legacy systems could not. I am pleased that Prepare Act includes language requiring FEMA to account for its systems modernization efforts. My amendments would build upon language in the underlying bill by requiring the FEMA administrator to report to Congress on any realized or projected cost savings and efficiencies attributable to modernization activities. My amendment takes into account the importance of ensuring that scarce federal dollars are spent wisely and seeks to ensure that FEMA can conduct effective oversight of scarce grant dollars. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by Ms. Watson-Coleman. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Per the roster agreement, listed next on the roster is amendment number 18, offered by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Rice. Would the gentlewoman like to offer her amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk and ask for its consideration.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print of the Prepare Act, offered by Ms. Rice.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Ms. Rice is now recognized for 5 minutes on her amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier this week, I attended the full committee field hearing, as did other members here, at the 9/11 Museum in New York City. As we sat in front of the surviving retaining wall, New York Police Commissioner Mr. Bratton and Fire Commissioner Nigro each spoke about the challenges first responders faced as they worked to save lives on the morning of September 11, 2001. One of the most troubling stories came from Fire Commissioner Nigro, who told the committee about a fire company that was forced to use a landline inside one of the World Trade Center buildings in order to communicate with a dispatcher. That's one vivid example of the communications failures we saw that day, and in response, the 9/11 Commission recommended that Congress delegate additional radio frequency spectrum to first responders. More than 10 years after the September 11th attacks, Congress finally implemented that recommendation and allocated radio frequency spectrum for the development of the nationwide public safety broadband network. This new public safety network has great potential to resolve our national interoperability challenges, but as any first responder can tell you, in order to make a real difference, the network must be hardened, more durable, and more resilient. This broadband network can only solve our interoperability challenges if it is fully operational in the face of cyber attacks. That threat is constant, and we need to know that it will not undermine emergency responders' communications capabilities in the event of another attack. My amendment would require the Office of Emergency Communications, upon completing its assessment of cyber risks to the Public Safety Broadband Network, to report to Congress on cybersecurity risks that could affect the network's near or long-term operations, and on the plans in place to eliminate or mitigate those risks. If the National Public Safety Broadband Network is vulnerable, so are its users, our first responders, and so are the victims they risk their lives to protect. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to ensure that first responders have the tools they need to do their job safely and effectively, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by Ms. Rice. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The amendment roster is now dispensed with. Are there any further amendments? There being no further amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the committee print as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the committee print as amended is agreed to. I now move that the committee print be reported favorably to the full committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. There being no further business to transact, the subcommittee stands adjourned.